The year is 1972, a Thursday night in a BBC television studio in London. 40 million people watching at home.
He's told us not to blow it, 'cause he knows it's all worthwhile. He told me.
And a man walks onto that stage wearing a jumpsuit, red hair, platform boots, and enough eye makeup to scandalize every living room in Britain simultaneously. He drapes his arm around his guitarist in a gesture so casually androgynous that the country doesn't quite know what to do with what it has just seen. Children watching from behind their parents' sofas feel something shift inside them that they won't have words for until years later.
There's a starman waiting in the sky.
That performance lasted 3 minutes and 22 seconds. It did not just launch a career, it created a before and an after in British cultural life that people who were there still talk about in exactly those terms. This is the story of how David Bowie became untouchable. Let's begin. The boy from Brixton. The year is 1947. Brixton is a working-class neighborhood in South London, a place of terraced houses and corner shops, and a community still finding its shape in the aftermath of the Second World War. David Robert Jones is born here on January 8th into a household that is ordinary in almost every way, except for the child growing up inside it. His mother, Peggy, is a cinema usherette. His father, Haywood, works for a charity. Neither of them has any particular connection to the arts, or any reason to expect that the boy they are raising will one day be described as the most influential artist of the 20th century.
Phone someone, so I picked on you. Oh, hey, that's far out. So you have.
The first defining moment of David's life has nothing to do with music. In 1962, a schoolyard fight over a girl resulted in his left eye being punched hard enough to permanently paralyze the muscles controlling the pupil. The pupil stays dilated. For the rest of his life, David Bowie will have one blue eye with a small pupil and one that appears almost entirely dark. The effect is arresting and strange, and will become one of the most recognizable physical features in popular culture, giving him an otherworldly quality that no costume designer could have invented. Music arrives early and with an obsessive force. He hears Little Richard at 9 years old, and something inside him locks into place permanently. Saxophone lessons begin at 13, paid for by his father. First bands form in his mid-teens: the Conrads, the King Bees, Davy Jones, and the Manish Boys, going nowhere in the way that first bands almost always go nowhere, but teaching him things about performance and audiences and the specific electricity of a room responding to a song that no amount of practice in a bedroom can replicate. Then comes the name change. Davy Jones of the Monkees is becoming famous, and there cannot be two of them. David Jones becomes David Bowie, named after the American frontiersman and his knife. A new name, a new beginning, neither of which immediately produces the result he is looking for: the search for an identity. The late 60s are a difficult period for David Bowie in ways that are almost invisible from the outside looking back. He is clearly talented.
This is Major Tom to ground control. I'm stepping.
Everyone who encounters him professionally understands that immediately. He has an ear for melody, an instinct for performance, and a restless creative intelligence that makes him interesting in almost any room he enters. What he does not have is a clear identity. And in the music industry of the late 60s, identity is everything. He moves between styles with a fluidity that impresses musicians and confuses labels. Folk influences appear and disappear. Novelty pop arrives and is quickly abandoned. Theatrical experimentation produces interesting work that nobody knows how to market. Space Oddity was released in 1969, timed to coincide with the Apollo moon landing, and became a minor hit built almost entirely on the cultural momentum of that event.
Ground control to Major Tom, your circuit's dead.
Rather than any genuine industry push behind the artist. When the moon landing fades from the news cycle, so does the song. The Man Who Sold the World follows in 1970, darker, heavier, genuinely strange, and is largely ignored. Hunky Dory arrived in 1971 and is considered by almost everyone who hears it to be a work of real quality. Changes, Life on Mars, Oh You Pretty Things, songs that would later be recognized as classics land in a commercial vacuum that produces almost no sales and very little radio play. 3 albums of genuine artistic merit, and the world has still not made up its mind about David Bowie. RCA Records, which has recently signed him, is growing quietly concerned. The label has invested in an artist who is clearly capable of something significant, but has shown no ability to translate that capability into the kind of commercial performance that justifies continued investment. Something needs to change. Bowie already knows what it is. He has known for some time. He is simply waiting for the courage and the circumstances to do it completely. The creation of Ziggy Stardust. The concept arrives not as a single idea, but as a convergence of obsessions that Bowie has been carrying for years. His time studying with Lindsay Kemp, a mime artist and theatrical performer who takes Bowie as a student in the late 60s, has given him a fundamental understanding that performance is not presentation, but transformation. You do not show the audience who you are. You become someone else entirely and invite them into that becoming. The science fiction novels he has consumed obsessively, particularly the work of American writer Vince Taylor, a real rock musician whose mental collapse into a messianic delusion provides the direct template for the Ziggy character to give him narrative architecture. The concept crystallizes into something specific and fully realized. An alien rock star arrives on Earth, becomes consumed by the fame and adulation he generates, and ultimately destroys himself under the weight of the persona he has created. The character is called Ziggy Stardust. Mick Ronson is recruited as lead guitarist and becomes the musical backbone of the Spiders from Mars, the band assembled to bring Ziggy to life. Ronson is from Hull, technically gifted, visually striking, and possessed of a musical instinct that perfectly complements Bowie's. The look is assembled with the precision of a costume designer working on a major theatrical production. Jumpsuits, platform boots, a red mullet haircut that has never been seen on a man before. Makeup applied not to feminize but to alienate, to signal that whatever this is, it is not from anywhere familiar. The androgyny is deliberate, and it is not a performance of sexuality. It is a performance of otherness, of existing outside every category the audience has been given. The rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars is recorded at Trident Studios in London in 1971, and the band know immediately that they have made something unlike anything else in existence. Nobody is paying attention. The rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars was released in June 1972, and the response is warm in exactly the wrong way. Music critics who encounter it recognize its quality immediately.
I made so many breakthroughs, but you, my love, were kind.
The NME gives it serious attention. Word passes through certain circles of the music industry that something genuinely unusual has arrived. But warm critical notices do not fill venues, and they do not move units, and they do not reassure a record label that has already watched 3 albums by this artist arrive and disappear without making the commercial impact that was supposed to justify the investment. Bowie is performing the Ziggy Show to audiences that are engaged and often genuinely astonished, but are not yet large enough to constitute a cultural moment. The full theatrical production, the costumes, the character, the complete transformation that Bowie undergoes every night he walks onto a stage is working exactly as intended for the people in the room. The problem is the size of the room. Tony DeFries, Bowie's manager, understands that the breakthrough requires a different kind of exposure: television. Specifically, the BBC's Top of the Pops, which on a Thursday evening reaches an audience of approximately 40 million people across Britain. A single appearance in the right song at the right moment could do in 3 minutes what months of touring had not managed to accomplish. Starman has been released as a single in April 1972 and has charted modestly without generating the kind of momentum the team needs. A Top of the Pops booking was secured for July 6, 1972. The band rehearses, the costumes are prepared. Nobody in that television studio on the evening of the performance has any genuine understanding of what is about to walk through the door and what it is about to do to the country watching at home. Starman and the Top of the Pops moment. Starman almost didn't exist. It was written late in the Ziggy Stardust album sessions specifically because the record needed something more accessible, something that could function as a point of entry for listeners who might be intimidated by the concept album surrounding it. Bowie has since acknowledged that the opening melody borrows consciously from Somewhere Over the Rainbow, the same ascending interval, the same sense of yearning for something beyond the visible world. It is not a sophisticated theft. It is an intuitive one, reaching for a melody that already lived in the emotional memory of every person who would ever hear it. The lyric is a transmission from an alien who has picked up rock and roll signals from Earth and is broadcasting them back. It is a song about otherness finding a community, about the outsider discovering that there are other outsiders out there waiting. Bernie, no. Bowie writes it from inside the Ziggy character, but the feeling underneath it is entirely his own. On July 6, 1972, Bowie performed Starman on Top of the Pops in the full Ziggy costume, and at the moment of the chorus, he draped his arm around Mick Ronson's shoulder with a casual intimacy that no man on British television has ever displayed toward another man in that way before. It is not a dramatic gesture. That is precisely what makes it revolutionary. The country watches. Children watching from living rooms across Britain feel something unlock inside them. The phones at the BBC begin ringing. The single entered the top 10 within days of broadcast. By the end of July, it has reached number 10 on the UK charts. By the end of the year, the name David Bowie means something entirely different to British culture than it did 6 months earlier. The impact. The Top of the Pops performance functions as a detonator. Everything that has been quietly building the album, the live show, the critical attention, the word of mouth ignites simultaneously in the weeks that follow. The rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars begins selling in numbers that its first weeks of release had given no indication of. The concert venues get larger. The audiences arrive in costume, having absorbed the Ziggy aesthetic and made it their own in the way that only truly transformative pop cultural moments allow. What Bowie has done that nobody has quite done before is give the outsiders a flag to gather under. Androgyny is the point. Alienness is the point. Every young person who has ever felt that they existed slightly outside the categories their world provided them watches that Top of the Pops performance and understands that their existence has been acknowledged by something. That feeling does not fade. Bowie followed Ziggy with Aladdin Sane in 1973. Another character, another complete reinvention. Pin-ups, Diamond Dogs, Young Americans, which pivots to Philadelphia soul and funk and demonstrates that the chameleonic quality is not a gimmick, but a genuine artistic methodology. Station to Station arrived in 1976 and is considered by serious music critics to be among the greatest albums ever recorded. Each reinvention should logically dilute the impact of what came before. Instead, each one compounds it. The audience learns to expect transformation and comes to understand that the transformation itself is the artistic statement. By the mid-70s, David Bowie was not operating in the same commercial or critical category as his contemporaries. He is operating in a category that has his name on it and nobody else inside it. Legacy. What comes after the Ziggy period is the story of an artist who refuses to stay anywhere long enough to become comfortable. The Berlin trilogy Low, Heroes, and Lodger, recorded between 1977 and 1979, in collaboration with Brian Eno, redefines the boundaries of what rock music is structurally capable of doing. Heroes in particular, recorded with the Berlin Wall visible through the studio window, becomes a song so large in its emotional ambition that it outlives every context it was ever placed in and continues to mean something new to every generation that finds it. The 80s bring Let's Dance and a global commercial peak that introduces him to an audience that has no knowledge of Ziggy or the Berlin period and doesn't need it. The cocaine addiction that had consumed the Thin White Duke period is dealt with and left behind with the same decisive quality that characterizes everything else Bowie does. The reinventions continued through the 90s and into the 2000s. Each decade produces a different Bowie, and each different Bowie produces work of genuine quality. On January 8, 2016, his 69th birthday, Bowie released Black Star, a final album that functions as a deliberate farewell, recorded in the full knowledge that he is dying of liver cancer and designed to be heard differently once that knowledge becomes public. 2 days later, he was gone. The response around the world is the kind of grief that is reserved for people who have occupied a private space in millions of individual lives simultaneously and irreplaceably. The boy from Brixton who couldn't get anyone to pay attention. The Thursday night performance that divided British culture into before and after. Some artists make music. David Bowie gave permission. Permission to be strange, permission to be another. Permission to become whoever you needed to be. That permission does not expire. David Bowie walked onto a BBC stage in 1972 and made 40 million people feel something they had no name for yet. That is what the greatest artists do. They arrive before the language exists to describe them. A boy from Brixton with mismatched eyes and a borrowed melody, and the absolute conviction that being yourself completely was the most radical thing you could do. He was right. He was always right. And the world has never quite recovered from how right he was.